several friends of mine, we got together and start really reflecting on how do, we as individuals and collectively continue and push these changes to make sure we move towards a more equitable society in which there is more fair opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
So in order to do that, we start breaking things down really pragmatically. Why do we still receive these same outcomes?
Yeah.
And a big part of it is, yes, opportunity may be there on paper, but there's still knowledge of how to really attain and navigate these opportunities as well. And then there's still access issues as well for a lot of people.
Welcome back to another episode of Your Visionary Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Brown, also known as Visionary CJ. And before I start this episode, I just wanted to pop in and let you know that the audio for this will be a little raspy from my end. This is my first time using my AirPods as my microphone. And needless to say, it wasn't a good idea. But hey, that's what it's about. Trial and error, learning from your mistakes. But this episode is still filled with gems, with knowledge, and just with lessons that you can instantly implement and learn from in your personal journey. And so I hope you learn from this. I hope this allows you to create a vision for your life and lead you closer to your purpose. Enjoy.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Your Visionary Podcast. I'm your host, Christian Brown, and I'm excited for you all to hear from this episode today. We have a special guest, another technology expert, and that's been a common trend, as you can see on this podcast, as I'm just going through this technology industry as a recent college graduate, and I've been very intentional with reaching out to professionals in the technology industry and just gaining as much insight as I can from them. And so this episode today, you're going to hear from John DeShazer, who is the founder and CEO of LogicSpree, a technology company that you'll learn more about. Before we go into that, I want to remind you what this podcast is all about. This is a one and only podcast intentionally designed to push you forward towards the vision you have for your life. And if you don't have a vision for your life, this is a podcast to help you structure a vision to become the person that God created you to be. And with every episode, my goal is to tell real, authentic, and purposeful stories. And not fluff, but true stories to help you create a vision for your life and get closer to your purpose. A purpose where you're having a positive impact on those around you and on the world. And I can definitely say that the guest that we're going to hear from today is having a positive impact on the world. And nonetheless, I want to welcome Mr. John DeShazer. How you doing, brother?
Thanks, Christian. I'm doing really well, and I really appreciate being able to join you today and share a little bit about my experience and help guide and inspire other people as well. Because I definitely like seeing other people succeed and finding out how I can support them along their way. Because a big part of my story as well is that people have helped me. People have reached out and helped me refine my view and my vision and help me achieve things. So I just see it as a cycle, as how we grow.
Yeah, I love that. And talk to us a little bit about that, about your story, because I know you just didn't, wake up one day and wanted to be the president of LogicSpree, right? So talk to us about that journey, if you will.
And also just to give everyone a little bit more of my bio before we get started. So yes, I'm president of LogicSpree, which is a Salesforce consulting firm based here in Atlanta. And I also serve as Director of Technology for Atlanta Technology Professionals. And I serve on the advisory board for Inspire EDU, which Inspire EDU is a nonprofit that focuses on technology resource and knowledge gaps and addressing them within the greater Atlanta community.
Very nice.
Getting to this point, it's definitely it's been a long story. It's not the pathway that I necessarily envisioned, but as I grew and got more exposure, my vision and purpose became clearer. I grew up in DeKalb County, southern DeKalb County, Decatur, not too far from South DeKalb Mall. And my father, he worked at the post office. He delivered mail, and that was the career that he knew. Besides his experience in the Army. My mother, she was a homemaker, so she helped, manage our home. She took care of us, which is a huge role. And I definitely credit, it's her support and my father's support and their guidance for shaping who I became. However, their experience in life was limited. They only knew so much. They knew how to succeed in the things that they were exposed to. My parents grew up during what was, legal U.S. segregation. So their opportunities were limited. And as the doors of opportunity became open, there was still a gap in understanding of how to navigate them and how to really take advantage of new opportunities that were not there before. And because of that, there was only so much that they could provide to us, their children, as far as their understanding of how things work. So early on, my parents really emphasized getting out there and taking a few chances and exposing yourself. Because if I just relied on what my family knew, then I only would know what they knew. And my father specifically mentioned, if you never leave your father's home, you never know more than he does. And he was telling me that he only knew so much. And so from an early age, there was that push to engage other people and learn and get more exposure. And that's been a big part of why I believe, I've been, a little more successful. Is just that risk taking and that I guess vulnerability as well to learning and finding people who have walked down these pathways before and learn from their experience.
Yeah.
So in terms of just the business world, I've always kind of had a knack for problem solving, and that's a big part of it. You identify a problem and you help people solve it, and that in itself is a valuable trait. And that's a big part of business is just problem solving. If you haven't identified a problem to solve, then of course you don't have a market of customers. So and I want to kind of pause right there to keep this dialogue going.
Yeah, for sure. And I love what you said, man. So much value, in that, especially just around your dad's quote, if you never leave your father's home, then you'll never know more than he does. And I think that's so powerful that you were able to get that guidance, from him, and that they were kind of giving you the ability to go and find your own path in a sense. But one question I do have, though, is just around the information that you were seeking, because during this time, we're growing up in the age of social media. It's almost easy to experience the information overload.
Yeah.
Right. And so not all information is good information. Yeah. And so I wanted to talk about that. Like, how did you seek out that good information that will lead you to becoming a businessman, a president, and a overall problem solver?
Yeah, actually, I like the point you mentioned, information overload, and not all information is, good information. The way I look at it is knowledge is only as valuable as its practical application, right? So not everything is useful. And that's where, focus comes into play. But then there becomes a question of where do you focus? Right. For me, what's been beneficial is tuning out a lot of information. So social media specifically. I actually don't have any social accounts beyond LinkedIn because it's professional. But that was something I did maybe about a decade ago because there is a lot of information out there, a lot of communication back and forth. So it becomes difficult to discern. What you're exposed to does influence you as well. Mm-hmm. So for me, it helped me stay focused by cutting out some exposure to information and being more intentional about the information that I seek. Mm. And actually, I know some people will find it funny, working in the world of technology, but I actually leverage very little technology in my personal life. A big thing when I worked in the corporate world is that I actually I intentionally did not have internet in my place because I worked in technology, so I had access most of my day. So when it came to my personal life, I had time to cut it off and to breathe and to reset and to focus when I got home versus being exposed and not having time to really think and really analyze things.
Wow, that's so good. And what's the value of that, of having that time to detach from technology and from just the, craziness?
Yeah, it allows you to really just, think about your purpose and think about what you're doing. Because if you're constantly in motion, then you're not necessarily questioning things or even trying to think if you're still aligned or what your purpose is or what you envision for yourself. So that time for self-reflection just allows you to just see and visualize it and think about it. And then if, things aren't aligned, well, what do you need to do to come back aligned? But if you're just constantly in motion, you're just trying to, either just constantly trying to keep up and stay in motion or get ahead. And you're not necessarily able to think about where you want to be or where you're going.
Yeah. Wow. That's dope. And when it comes to just your personal purpose and, your driver, what would you say that is?
There's a few different things. So I definitely credit my mother in terms of helping really shape my personality and my empathy for others and desire to be part of a community. And really realizing that, we're not here alone. We're not necessarily just all just competing with each other, in which we're in a competitive environment. However, not everything, is we have to compete about. There's knowledge that we can share with each other. There's resources we can share with each other. There's things that we can do to support each other to become more successful. And which, a lot of us can succeed even in a competitive world. And my mother really emphasized looking at, how we can support each other. And so I carried that forward. And so even, as I enter into, competitive business world, I looked at opportunities of how I could support other people in being successful. And there's a number of people who share that viewpoint as well. It's like, how can they help others? Because, there's plenty out there for us, at least in our environment. But that actually led to another big motivator for me. So getting into this space in technology in the corporate world and, realizing that there is plenty out there for us, but then also really realizing that it's not necessarily that easy. It's not that available to all of us, especially as say as Black people. While the opportunity on paper is there are still a lot of barriers and challenges that prevent us from being able to fully take advantage of what is available, as a society. And so me personally realizing that and making it say to, the other side of things, made me, just see that kind of disparity and especially in outcome, and motivated me to what can I do to widen this door and to break down these barriers further, because the opportunity is there. So how make sure that it's more equitable and more fair, especially growing up in, say, communities that I grew up in, and just moving to our side of town and just seeing how vastly different it is. And just not feeling that it is something that has to exist, that kind of disparity.
Man. I love that. And one thing that I just thought about when you spoke on how the change in your environment impacted you, it makes me think about a quote that says, "In order to grow, you must place yourself in a growth environment." And that was one of the things that I had to learn early on, especially in college, just entering my college career with no real purpose or just desire to do anything. I kind of just went into a world that wasn't good for me, and I had to, had to figure out what a growth environment looked like. And basically it meant getting around people who were doing things differently than me, but doing better things, quote unquote. So just placing myself in a new environment allowed me to personally grow. And so I definitely, feel what you're talking about. And I want to get around kind of the things that you're doing now when it comes to economic equality in Atlanta, because I want to say like Black people own 0.5% of the wealth in America. I was reading that in the book Powernomics, and I was reading, a decade ago, but I think that statistic is still true. But even in Atlanta, there's like the biggest gap in terms of wealth. So kind of talk about that aspect and then talk about what you're doing to help with that.
Yeah. So I'm a big reader as well. especially when it comes to history or current events or just different things that impact the society or the reality that we live in. And one of the most impactful books that I've read in more recent years is Dr. King's Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, in which, he's a true visionary, but I don't think he gets the credit that I don't think we fully understand his vision and his message and his efforts as he intended. I feel that a lot of his message was actually kind of just watered down and whitewashed, and to the point of where we look at him as a mythological figure, but instead of actually studying what he's saying and the methods that he's really wanted to push forward and solving these challenges, we just, we don't review them. And to get to the point of the book, he emphasized the fight that they were fighting in the 50s and 60s, and was around, legal challenges to say segregation and opportunity, access to opportunity. But he also took it a step further because he realized, it's not just the social aspect of it, but economics as well. And there's a lot of barriers there. There's a quote attributed to him, and I'm probably just more so paraphrasing, but he questioned, what's the point of desegregating the lunch counter if the person can't afford, the burger at the counter? You still end up with the situation, relatively. You still end up with disenfranchised communities. And there's a lot of challenges and barriers when it came to not only the, say, attainment of, stable careers, but also wealth as well. And those being huge factors when it came to community stability. And that was an area that he was really starting to push before he was assassinated. But he spoke about how if we don't address those issues, and this is, 50 years ago, if we don't address these issues, we're going to relatively still see the same situation, just under a different name. The outcomes will still be relatively the same. But, it'll be harder to pick it apart because you're not facing down, say, legal segregation. You're not facing down these legal barriers, but the barriers still persist and the outcomes will still be the same. Mm-hmm. So several friends of mine, we got together and especially over the summer, and so start really reflecting on how do, we as individuals and collectively continue and push these changes to make sure we move towards a more equitable society in which there is more fair opportunity. Mm-hmm. So in order to do that, we start breaking things down really pragmatically. Why do we still receive these same outcomes? Yeah. And a big part of it is, yes, opportunity may be there on paper, but there's still knowledge of how to really attain and navigate these opportunities as well. And then there's still access issues as well for a lot of people. What you mentioned about, going into college and not having necessarily a clear vision. Same, I had a little bit more revision because my brother experienced it the hard way. So he went off to college and he struggled. But that was because my parents, they had no concept of, what higher education really could. They had an idea of the potential of it. They knew that it could lead to a better life, but they didn't know how to navigate it. And college is complex. Getting into college is complex. Making it through college is complex. And then getting out of college and landing a career that is stable and then navigating advancement in that career. Those are complex things that, people have over generations have built knowledge around, and they share that with future generations as well to make it easier for them to succeed. Is making sure that the future generations have it a little bit easier. And for us, a lot of times those opportunities are still relatively new. Like my parents are still alive, and, it came about during their lifetime, their generation. So of course they had a hard time understanding, how really to take advantage of these things.
Yeah. And John, and on that note of your parents, John, we have one question from Elisa. She says, you talked about the mindset your parents had versus the one that you have now. So with that being said, do you think that if you were raised in a home where your parents' mindset will be more like your current mindset, would you be in a different career? If so, what would it be?
That's a great question. Yeah. Hmm. I think if my parents' mindset or their knowledge of the world um, was, say, closer to mine,
Yeah.
maybe it would start a little sooner. And there's a lot of things I did have to learn on my own the hard way, and maybe things would have been a little bit easier getting to this point. I was fortunate to actually find people in my life who could help me navigate these challenges. It just wasn't my parents.
Mm-hmm.
But if their mindsets were different, it may have come from them. I may have not had to seek external.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great answer. And when it comes to just finding those people that are outside of your household, where do you go?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my experience, it's, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's just identifying people who are, successful and engaging them. A lot of people are willing to help and provide good advice and open doors. I mean, there's a good amount of people who aren't as well, but you do find people. And for me, whenever I worked in a job, I would ask people who have been there for a while, how could I be more effective? Or what do I need to do in order to advance? And that kind of engagement definitely stood out for me. A number of the people that I found as mentors own businesses and they've run businesses. And that's definitely, helped me in my career path so far, even like with my current business now. I'm not facing as many challenges as, say, entrepreneurs who just start completely from scratch. Because there's a lot of things that you have to learn the hard way, or you may learn the hard way, but there's a number of things you don't have to learn the hard way if somebody else has already learned it the hard way. Yeah. In college, I found mentors in the local town. I went to Georgia College in Milledgeville. Mm-hmm. And I worked in retail, I worked in fast food, and I got to know just the people in town. And I was fortunate to meet a local business owner who took me underneath his wing. He saw that I was studying in school, and he saw that, I was still really trying to figure out the world. So he provided me with an opportunity to learn from him. So I was fortunate in that sense. Yeah. And then from there, it was just identifying people who were like him, people who I saw that were successful, and really trying to understand how they navigate it. How do they identify opportunity? How do they take advantage of opportunity?
Yeah, that's good. And Alicia commented, he said she was fortunate enough to find them in church and school, and most times they found her.
Yeah, that's a big part of it. Sometimes a lot of people find you and you don't realize the opportunity. Some people will approach you with, feedback or advice, and they're coming from a good place. But I think it's also important to not take it as, personal criticism. Mm-hmm. Is that a lot of times in the professional world, if somebody's reaching out to you with feedback, typically, at least in my experience, and that's so that you can refine yourself, so you can become more successful. It comes off as maybe an immediate criticism, but that person is willing to engage with you and to help you become more successful by telling you essentially what you're doing wrong or what you can be doing better. And I think that's a sign of like somebody to continue to engage. If they're willing to tell you something, then engaging them and asking for more advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think just setting your mind on the belief that there is someone out there that is in the world to help you accelerate your journey. Because for me, when I first took on the mindset of wanting to find a mentor, I didn't quite know how to initiate it, right? And I would see people who look successful, but I would either be timid or nervous to say something, and so I just wouldn't, and it would kind of, I would beat myself up about it, after the fact. But then one day in school, we had a guest speaker who was an entrepreneur. And then I felt that urge again, but I actually, took action that time, and it resulted in getting a mentor, that helped me change the trajectory of my life. And so I believe once your mindset is set on looking for a mentor, looking for guidance, I think you'll begin to see those people show up in your life, and then it's up to you to kind of take that action.
Yeah, exactly. It takes that understanding that you're going to feel a little bit vulnerable.
Yeah.
And putting yourself out there and not being afraid to engage someone who is more successful or say in a higher position. And sometimes you hear no, but you keep asking. Yeah. Your story reminded me of earlier in my career, I worked for a company called CBeyond. It's a telecom company. Later became Virtual Communications. But for every new round of employees, they will bring in the executives and they have this big luncheon with them. And CEO of CBeyond, his name is Jim Geiger. He spoke, welcomed us all there. And he said, hey, I'm a fairly open person. And I believe in supporting people in their career and helping them. If anybody in this audience wants to have lunch with me, we'll email my assistant and we'll set it up.
Wow.
And I took him up on that. I emailed and he sat down, he had lunch with me several times. Wow. And told me about his experience, told me about the companies that he started, he's founded, successful, started other businesses, to him leading and organizing CBeyond. So he was more than willing to provide his story and feedback on how to accelerate your career and how to think about things. It's just being willing to engage them, because he told the entire audience, let me know, and it can be intimidating when, the CEO of this company and you just starting says, hey, if you want to have lunch with me, let me know. Yeah. You may think that, it's not for me, or maybe he's thinking of like more senior people. But yeah, some people will just be upfront and tell you that they're open, and it's just taking them up on that offer.
Yeah. And that just goes back to just being comfortable, being uncomfortable, right? And just knowing that there's growth there. And most of the times when you're in a growth environment, it's going to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because you're doing something that you're not used to.
Yeah. That's like with any change, right? Change is, being open that things will change, and lowering your resistance to it. But that's vulnerability. So, and for me, going back to my experience growing up, it required, looking at things differently, because my understanding of the world was really informed based on how I grew up and my parents' experience. Right. And so being willing to kind of step away from that, and that's a big challenge. That's not necessarily just an easy thing to do, to just kind of, start letting go of your understanding of the world to learn something new about it.
Yeah. Wow. That's real. And there's another thing I want to ask you, just as a Black man, as a Black CEO of a technology company, which is where I strive to be one day, right? So this is kind of a selfish question, but hopefully it helps. Hopefully it provides some value. Where do you think where do you think technology and economic equality, where do they fit? What's the relationship between the two?
It's a good question. I'll say for here in Atlanta, there is a thriving technology industry. One of the gaps that I've seen, and one of the things I've been working behind the scenes to address as well, is access to that opportunity for Black professionals. Because if we look at our numbers in terms of, our population, we represent the majority of the people within the city of Atlanta, but also the metro area. But then you look at, say, the number of people like working in the technology industry in itself here, and you see those numbers represented. So then it's the question of, why is that when it comes to hiring? Is it a challenge of, are there not enough Black people entering into your hiring pipeline for you to interview, to consider for positions? Are the people who are entering into the pipeline not making it through for whatever reason? Or the people who make it through, are they not staying? So I started really breaking it down. So the pool, the potential is here in Atlanta for Black people to be really engaged in the technology sector. The reality is that it's not right now. So I see that there's so much potential, not only in entrepreneurship around, technology and the technology demands, but also just careers and working in a lot of these organizations, and not even just say the Amazons or the Googles or say Teslas of the world. We focus on, say, the larger brands, but there's a lot of organizations that are smaller and mid-sized organizations that represent vast career opportunities that are here. And a lot of times opportunities like that are spread through personal networks or existing networks. Yeah. And one of the challenges that we've been discussing behind the scenes is those networks, they continue to remain closed and focus on, say, the Northern Metro as well. Mm-hmm. And they focus on recruiting from existing networks and pools of candidates. And it becomes unintentional maintenance of the status quo because, they may not focus on recruiting at, say, Spelman or Clark Atlanta or Morehouse. They may focus on, say, Georgia Tech because maybe the founder went there. And then it just becomes if we want to really, say, expand opportunity, we have to change our behavioral patterns as organizations as well in terms of how we're recruiting. Then there's an aspect of informing talent as well. So what skill sets are these employers looking for? How do you get those skill sets? And then how do you navigate those careers once you're in the door? Because there's also understanding corporate culture for these organizations. There's understanding, how to really grow into different positions as well. And then honestly, there's people who just open doors for you as well. So networking is a huge part of it. And having access to those networks is huge. And that's that informal network of people who know each other. And that's definitely been a benefit of mine. And I mentioned early on, I'm a part of Atlanta Technology Professionals. That is a network of executives and entrepreneurs who all have gotten to know each other over the years. And in terms of opportunities for, career advancement, future contracts, just connections, they prefer each other because they know each other. They're in each other's networks. Mm-hmm. I personally benefit from that because I'm in that network now. But I realize that is not a representation of how I envision things to be in terms of a fair system. Mm-hmm. So part of what I'm doing is working behind the scenes of how we expand access to networks and individuals and opportunity across the city so that, say, an organization like Atlanta Technology Professionals can truly be Atlanta Technology Professionals.
Yeah. Wow. Interesting. And how's that been for you, behind the scenes? Is it harder than you thought it would be going into it? Are you realizing some things? Talk a little bit about that, your perspective from behind the scenes.
So it's definitely a challenge because it involves change. It involves change for a lot of individuals who are accustomed to things being a certain way. But then there's also a lot of support. Mm-hmm. And with that support, there's a challenge of understanding because, again, we're in a society in which, on paper, there's equal access, equal opportunity. So getting to the point of understanding that although we say that, but the reality is that it's not, it's not true. And it takes some people a little bit more time to come around to that. But there's a number of people who have come around to that, and they understand that there are gaps, and that there are still challenges, and they are willing to put their resources and their energy into helping being part of the solution. And that's one of the big encouraging parts of these conversations is finding a lot of people who are in positions of influence, who are not only after, say, a PR win or, putting out a tweet saying, we see you, we hear you, but being committed to actually driving these changes and using the power of their pen to drive these changes as well.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. That's great, man. Well, this has been an awesome conversation, and I know it's provided value for me, and so I know to provide value for others as well. And this is one of the questions that I like to ask towards the end of episodes. If you could go back and tell your 21-year-old self, you can give your 21-year-old self advice. I know it's going to be a cliche question, but if you can give your 21-year-old self advice on how to make it, what would you tell him?
I'll definitely say I learned a lot in my 20s, so it would be it'd be a very long conversation with myself. Just a great question. I'm trying to think of what would be the best piece of advice I would give my younger self. Mm. Well, one of the things I think that's really critical that I learned as well, and that was, given lots of information and feedback on that has enabled me to take more risk, is very pragmatic as well, is financial literacy and financial management. And having that as a factor in decision making, because that impacts your ability to take chances and take risk in the future. It's one thing to tell people that, all you have to do is have a great idea, and, just pursue it. But if your finances aren't in order, or you don't have access to the right finances, it's very difficult to move and take a risk, especially if you have, other things that you have to take care of. You have your own life to take care of, you have dependents. So that long-term financial thinking and understanding of finance, I think, is critical from a young age, because it's going to impact you later on in your ability. One of the things that, I would share with everyone as well, before starting my business, I planned it out for maybe 2 years and made sure I, was able to secure myself financially, and take that risk. Because, if you're in a position where you're not able to take that risk because of your finances, it's going to prevent you from moving forward with an opportunity. It can be a great idea, but the reality is, if you don't have the means to do it, you don't have the means to execute. So it's something to think about, well in advance, because that is something that trips up a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that, and I think that's the perfect advice and the perfect way to end this episode. And so, John, I appreciate you for your time and your insight, and just for coming on my platform today. And I look forward to just continuing to build our relationship, and just growing. So I appreciate it, and thank you everybody for tuning in today. This conversation will be available after this. I release an episode every Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And this episode in particular will be available probably 2 weeks from now. So be sure to subscribe on all platforms, Your Visionary Podcast. And reach out to John DeShazer on LinkedIn. He said he's not a social media guy, so if you want to get in touch with him, LinkedIn is the way.
Exactly.
So there it is. So see you, everybody. Peace and love.
All right.
And now this part of the episode is called the Visionary Minute, where I'll go over 3 key takeaways from the previous episode. In this episode with John, I learned a lot. And the first thing that stood out to me was a quote that he said multiple times. He said, "If you never leave your father's home, you'll never know more than he does." And that stood out to me and made me think about how important it is to be brave enough to leave our parents' homes. And knowing that with leaving our parents' homes comes growth, comes change, and comes evolution. And of course, with that comes mistakes and challenges, but those only make us better. And the second takeaway, he said, it's important to practice supporting instead of competing. And he talks about how he was growing within the technology industry and just building up his network. He had the mindset of, how can I support this person instead of looking at them as competition? And I think that is relevant for any industry or any career path. It makes me think about the difference between giving and taking, and how givers are more powerful than takers. And lastly, number 3, he says financial management is the key to success. And I love that he said that, because it just shines a light on the importance of being intentional with our finances. And I think that's important for anybody, no matter the age. And that's something that I'm personally trying to get better with. And so I challenge you to do the same, especially as the new year is coming around. Let's just be more intentional about our finances and how we spend our money, right? So whether that be me making a budget or hiring a financial manager, if you can afford to do that. But I do want to challenge you to just be better this year. Take something from this episode and then share it. You can share it via email, via text message, or give somebody a call, FaceTime them and let them know about this episode, and then just send them the link. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank y'all for tuning in. Peace and love.